Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Simple Way to Stop Distracted Driving. My name is Sherb Brown. I think a lot of you have met me over the years. I've served as a president of About Business Media for a long time. Currently serving as president of Fleet Connection. I'm joined today by Ted Chen, CEO of Lifesaver, and I'm also joined by Greg Tolan from Nabholz Construction and Vikram Sekhan, who's a FedEx Ground contractor. We're excited to have you join us today. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I've talked to a lot of fleet managers that struggle with this concept on a daily basis, and we're really looking forward to sharing some great information with you today. If I can we go to the next slide, Ted? And just kind of go over the agenda real quick here. We'll start with addressing the problem, which is mobile device distraction, which is obviously a key issue for everybody who's got like a fleet of vehicles. Then we'll get into fleet safety technology options, which we obviously know there's quite a few of. And then best practices for mitigating the problem, and then a panel discussion and a Q&A. I'd like to just remind people too, there's a Q&A button on the bottom. If you have questions while the webinar is going on, just go ahead and type your question in there, and we will address them as quickly as we can. If we don't have a chance to get to your question, I promise we'll get to you as soon as the presentation is over. And we will, anybody who wants a copy of the presentation after it's over, happy to forward the contents over to you. With that, I'll turn it over to Ted.
Well, thanks so much, Sherb. I appreciate you doing the introduction and moderating this session for us. Hopefully we'll cover some really interesting information that you might not know about and get you to start thinking more seriously about how to tackle this problem of distracted driving, which is obviously one that almost every fleet operator out there today is dealing with. So just a little bit of background on the problem to set it up, and then we can talk about ways to solve it. So obviously in the world of fleet safety, and this is more generally just driver safety, the top three causes of crashes are, and we did a little research before we kind of put this slide together, but I think every source out there, and there's lots of different sources, no one has the official say on who's right or who's wrong, but every single source out there will say that the top three causes are distracted driving, speeding, and drunk driving. Sometimes number two and number three get flip-flop, but they're always these are always named as the top three, and distracted driving is always number one. So what is distracted driving? Well, it's obviously a label for a lot of different activities, right? You can see here on the screen, there's a bunch of different icons there. You can obviously categorize these distractions into three basic categories: visual distraction, manual distraction, and cognitive distraction. I know for a lot of the safety folks on the call today, this is old news, and people know that there's these three categories. But if you think about all three of those, there's so many different things that could be distracting to the driver while they're doing their job. And you can see the icons like makeup and navigation and texting and combing your hair, or eating and drinking or arguing, or so on and so forth. Thinking, and then of course just the act of talking with someone can be distracting as well. What's interesting about this slide, of course, is if you think about all these different activities, the cell phone happens to be representative of all three distractions in some way, shape, or form, right? So if you're looking at your screen, or if you're trying to message someone back using your hands, those are obviously the clear examples of visual and manual distraction. And then if a phone call comes in, or you're making a phone call going out, whether it's Siri or otherwise, you're taking your mind off the road. And I'm sure everyone has had an example where they're deep into a conversation and then they miss an exit off a highway or something, and they have to circle around and come back to it. So we're all guilty of this, and and the cell phone is unique in that way, in that it checks the box on all three types of distraction.
I think it's worth noting too that this is an issue that didn't even exist, 15, 20 years ago when we were doing fleet safety surveys and publishing statistics. The issues with driving, it was obviously drinking was obviously number one, or was usually number one. Speeding was number two. But the issue of distracted driving was just minimal for most fleets. It just wasn't a big concern. And now is not only not minimal, it's number one.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, I mean, obviously the phone distraction thing, we all know about it. Our society is really now built on this. And I just wanted to point out something that's very obvious to all of us, which is this is not our fault. It's actually not within our control here. There's numerous studies have indicated to us that not only are our bodies and our minds designed to sort of react to these phones, right? And but it's really hard to put down. And even the app developers, and you can see at the bottom there, push notifications, these little red bubble numbers that are attached to each app icon, and even the endless feeds for social media and whatnot. They're all basically designed to keep you engaged and not stop using that app, whatever that app is. So it's really kind of in some ways obviously I'm making a very generalized statement, but it's not within in the average person's control to just ignore it. And that's why, at the end of the day, we think that solutions for cell blocking are so important. So this slide is kind of an eye chart, but it really speaks to a few concepts that I wanted to bring to your attention. Number one is it's not a coincidence that this little red circle here was kind of at the start of where commercial auto insurance as an industry, and this is just to set the slide up a little bit, this is a graph of what the commercial auto insurance industry has experienced from a profit loss standpoint over the last 15, 17 years or whatever. So you can see it was pretty healthy in 2005, and then right around 2010, it started getting unprofitable, and then the trend has gotten a lot worse over time. That's the gray section of the chart here. And then again, not coincidentally, the smartphone was invented around 06, 07, and you see that's kind of now it's pervasive. Everyone has one, of course, right? And then the other point to make here, and I'd love the panelists to chime in if there's anything else I'm missing here, but this blue line right here is really represents kind of a premium, and insurance premium. As you can see, it went down. It dropped down to its lowest point in 10, and then as people started losing money, they started raising rates, and they've tried to catch up and make up for the losses. But as you can see, the losses keep getting worse. So you can imagine if they had kept the premium at its low in 2010, this gray section would have been much larger. So there's a lot of concepts here, but just wanted to point to you that it's been a tough business to be in. It's fleet insurance. As operators of fleets, you probably experience this because you're having trouble finding affordable insurance, and a lot of companies with operating fleets have turned to alternative insurance options as a result. Did you want to say anything here, Sherb, just before I keep going?
I think it's worth noting too that a lot of fleets are self-insured, and I know most of the market that we deal with, but these things all still apply. I think most people would agree that losses have increased, distraction has increased, and cost of accidents is going up too. So it's become more of an issue for just about every fleet than it ever has been in the past.
And so, yeah, I mean, obviously, just to check the box and make sure that we address the elephant in the room. Nuclear verdicts are a hashtag now, and unfortunately, they are part of the world of logistics and transportation and fleet. So this is a recent case which was settled in late last year or fall of last year, and part of the issue of why it was such a large verdict was because of the phone distraction. It is unfortunately part of the world that the society that we live in this country, but it is certainly something that we're all aware of, and making it worse for the insurance procurement that we just talked about. So then really kind of coming back to what we said earlier about that it's not our fault, right? It really isn't. Not only are our human minds and DNA kind of set up to respond to these constant stimulus that are coming off of the phone, but the app developers are designing things to be that way too. And so at the end of the day, we think it's prudent to prevent this problem from happening versus just warning it, because at the end of the day, warning is great. I mean, now you know how often your drivers are perhaps on their device, and obviously we all know that it happens. But now with a camera solution or that type of another technology, you have the full visibility into how often it's happening, and it can be scary, right? So at the end of the day, we think that the best way is to stop it altogether. And again, cell blocking is the best way to do that. So I'm not sure, but I don't know if you had anything more to add there.
I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. I've talked to a lot of fleet managers that have had a lot of success with camera systems, but they do come with their own challenges too, because it's a lot of data. It's a lot to wrap your head around. It requires management. It definitely helps, and I think everybody who's installed a camera system would probably attest to the fact that it helps improve driver behavior, but it doesn't prevent certain things. And I think blocking cell phones is probably the easiest thing you can do. It doesn't require active fleet management.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add one more point, which is we see a lot of companies come to us after, a few months of full deployment on cameras, dash cams, and they literally are shocked at how often the drivers are on their devices, and they're like, well, you know what, we really need to do something about this, because now we know how bad the problem is. I think everyone knows that it's a problem, but until you see it happening and you see and you get the reports, the video reports, you don't realize the magnitude of that problem. And so in some ways, ironically, the camera solutions are kind of helping our business, right? So.
And I could tell you some horror stories about some fleet managers actually trade videos, and I think we could actually create a website that would just be a YouTube channel of horrible fleet driver videos. Just the amount of things that they can do wrong while they're in the cab, between talking on a phone, eating, driving with their knees, shaving, combing their hair, arguing. And the cameras do help, but they don't necessarily stop the behavior.
Yeah, and just to put a pin on that point, again, I think eating, drinking, all that stuff is distracting and very dangerous as well, and is warnable. I think it's a warnable event that can be mitigated through those verbal warnings from cameras and whatnot. But back to my original point, I think the phone is just too addictive, too irresistible, and so people will ignore those warnings. And I think I've made that point pretty clear. Oops. So then what are some of the fleet technologies out there? I think a lot of the folks on the phone today are probably familiar with these solutions. We kind of categorize them. There's a lot of different solutions out there, but we kind of took the three that are, that we're most familiar with, and wanted to kind of just summarize what each one does well and how they're all really work together in a very complementary nature to do their respective jobs and make it for a much more a comprehensive safety approach, right? So cell phone blocking, telematics, and dash cams. As you can see there, and I'm not going to go through every row here, but you can see they're all good they're all really good at different things, and if you kind of put them all together, you have a very comprehensive approach. When you're thinking about phone distraction, as I said in our previous slide, you may be able to warn it sometimes, but you're not going to be able to really discourage it for real until you kind of prevent it, right? And so that's what our point here is. Cell phone blocking, it should be part, because it's such a simple and a cost-effective category, should be part of a fleet operator's kind of overall strategy for driver safety, and so we think that prevention on those two levels with phone handling and phone calls can really add a lot to improving safety metrics for the company. And we'll talk a little bit more about outcomes in just a few minutes. One other point to add on the last slide is this whole complementary nature of things is really is not just our philosophy, but really, a lot of folks in the industry feel the same way. We have lots of telematics partnerships. We know the dash cam guys really well, and so those folks in those two categories believe it too, right? They're promoting us, and we have active channel partnerships with some of the biggest and best telematics solution providers out there.
It's also worth noting that being commercially reasonable is something I think every fleet needs to consider. And if we look at telematics solutions 10, 15 years ago, it was a fairly new technology, and there was some early adopters, but I think most fleets felt like they didn't have to be early adopters and they were okay without it. But as it became a bigger and bigger thing, it almost became commercially necessary to be able to track bad driving behavior, because if you weren't, it's just easy to imagine your CEO sitting in a seat in a courtroom and somebody saying, do you have any idea that this person was doing these 5 or 6 bad behaviors, and you had no idea, and he was driving around in your $150,000 vehicle. So now it is commercially reasonable, and we're looking at a tech stack here that really is kind of necessary for everybody. You can't just put your head in the sand anymore and say, I don't need it. I think you always need to think about that moment when your CEO is going to be in that seat in the courtroom, and the plaintiff's attorney is going to be asking them, what are you doing to monitor your drivers? What are you doing to make sure that they're acting in a safe manner and protecting the public? And then you also have to think about your assets too. And you need to know how well they're treating your assets. You need to make sure that your employees are safe.
I think that's a really good point, Sherb. Is if it's commercially reasonable, any plaintiff's attorney out there is going to go after that. Hey, this was totally within reason for you to do, and yet you didn't do it. Unfortunately that's what they'll do. Is they'll go straight to that. So
and you can't just say I didn't know. I think 10 or 15 years ago you could just say we didn't know. But if you don't know now, it's I think you're trending towards willful blindness, where you should know, because they can bring up 20 people that are in similar situations. They'll say, sure, I know whenever my drivers do this type of behavior, and this is what we're doing to stop it.
Yeah. So moving on to best practices, and what are companies that we work with doing these days, and what we advise companies to do is really twofold. One, so again, whatever your policy is, and every company has a little bit of a different policy, but there's the two basic flavors are, I want my devices to be used hands-free, or I don't want my devices to be used at all, right? While you're driving and on duty and in my employment, performing the job responsibilities that I'm asking you to do, either you got to be hands-free or you can't use them at all. So those are the two basic flavors. To be very clear, just anecdotally, on our end, when we see companies come to us, we pretty much see most people are adopting the hands-free approach because, number one, it's the legal requirement across all of the U.S. and Canada. And then number two, we also think that they want to be, safe but productive, right? So being hands-free allows you to be productive and, just be, to be honest, right? You do need to sometimes redirect your employee to a different location, or there's got to be some sort of, way of communicating with them before they get to their destination, because otherwise it's too late. So that hands-free approach seems to be the majority, a vast majority, like 90% of all fleets that we talk to are in that hands-free category. But there are a small percentage that do have that zero tolerance policy. Either whatever approach you have, the system that you pick should be able to. Hopefully, you guys would look for one of the criteria would be to look for a system that allows you to customize that enforcement to the specific policy that you have. So number one, have a strong policy. If you don't have one, beef it up. We or any of the other companies that do this stuff would be happy to review and help strengthen those policies. There's a lot of criteria around it, that best practices in terms of what a strong policy should have. You can see some of that in these icons here on the slide. But given, that we want to keep going here, I'll just, and everyone's going to get the slides. We'll just leave it at that for now. And then the second piece, of course, is after you strengthen your policy, you need to enforce it, right? And that's been the age-old sort of problem, is that there's been no way to enforce this policy. But, as Sherb was saying, it's commonplace now to enforce with technology. And if you're not doing it already, then maybe you should consider that, right? And I divide the enforcement into two categories. One is your corporate phones, anything that's a corporate device, no ifs, ands, or buts. You need to enforce it. You need to have a technology to restrict that usage and make it hands-free or zero tolerance, whatever flavor you have. And if you're not doing that, there's a huge exposure there. And then on the personal side, right? The personal side can be, again, I'm going to divide that into two subcategories. There's the bring your own device where you're using it for work. If you're using it for work, you're probably reimbursing them. And again, that becomes a work tool where that's exposing you as a company, and you need to seriously consider restricting that as well or enforcing that as well. We would advise that you use the leverage of the reimbursement to convince employees to put it on their personal device, bring your own device. And then on the strictly personal phone where you don't have any control over and you don't have any works content on there, I think the short answer is you don't have any leverage there to get the software onto the device. But we also think the best practice is offer the program up, because you don't want your asset to be damaged by someone using their personal phone. So you should offer it up. It's very commercially reasonable to use that term again, and we think at least you can show that you did everything possible on all three categories of devices there. I'm going to stop there and see if anyone else on the panel wants to chime in here. Okay, great. Let's go to the roundtable, and Sherb, I think this is kind of your area, so I'm going to let you kind of lead this section.
Yeah, for Vic and Greg, I think one of the top issues that most fleet operators are going to have is selling this internally, and that means selling it up the corporate food chain and selling it to drivers. And Greg, if we could start with you, just kind of give us a quick overview of how you sold it to management and how you sell it to drivers.
Well, I can speak from my experience. You have to have full buy-in on your management. It doesn't do any good to roll this out to your employees and have a manager go behind you and say, upper management's making us download this app on our phone. I don't know what it's about or why we're using it, and I really don't like it. You need to let them be a part of the conversation of, we need to be proactive as opposed to reactive when it comes to safety. And we need to identify our problems with distracted driving and get something in place before something major does happen with an accident. And let your managers know and see that this is a viable solution, and that, be encouraging to the employees as you roll it out.
Vic, I think it was probably a little easier sales job for you since it was a corporate mandate. Nobody had any choice, right?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's actually pretty straightforward. This is, a contractual obligation. We basically tell, any new employee that we onboard, hey, this is part of, what we are required to do as FedEx Ground is concerned. So, meaning we employ, multiple technologies that prevent, distracted driving, everything from, dash cams to the lifesaver application running on corporate devices. So it's pretty cut and dry, straightforward approach.
Yeah. And Greg, I think you're a good test case here. You've got a before and after since you rolled out a cell phone blocking technology. Can you give us I think Vic always had it, so there's no control group for him. But Greg, if you can kind of give us a minute and go through what your experience has been.
Sure. So you can see on the chart here that 17, 18, and 19, we had 7, 7, and 10 accidents. And halfway through the year 2020, in July, we rolled out the Lifesaver app. One thing with distracted driving, there's no real measure as far as how many accidents are tallied roadside accidents. It's not like speeding or DWI on an accident report. You check the box, and all that gets uploaded to the Transportation Committee, and they say, 2 million people was injured or killed in DWI wreck. Unless a driver just admits to using their cell phone while in an accident, which the majority of them is not going to do, there's no real good way of tracking it. But you can see that after we enforced it, we went from 3, 2, and now this year we've only had 1 accident, that at-fault accident. So I attribute this all to Lifesaver. Of course, you'll have somebody say, well, we're just being really safe. We haven't implemented anything different as far as when it comes to vehicles on the roadway. So I think this is a pretty telling.
No, that's profound.
Yes.
That's pretty solid.
Right.
I went back to the topics in case you wanted to cover anything else here. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. For Vic and for Greg both, can you guys give us just a quick overview of what the onboarding process is like when you bring on a new driver, and how do you explain it to them? Do you get pushback at that point?
I can tell you mine. When they're hired on there, it's explained to them that they'll have the Lifesaver app, and our policy is if you don't have and agree to use the app, you don't drive for us. And if your main job is driving, you're probably going to find a different career path. Because you're going to have the Lifesaver app on there, as far as being a driver is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, or Nabholz is concerned.
And
Vic, what about with your fleet?
Yeah, like I said, it's also pretty straightforward for us. This is a requirement, so there's no such thing as opting out of turning off. For example, the pushback that we get would be the in-cab video. Initially, we found folks being a little conscious, but we told them we have a fleet of 100 plus vehicles, and And, what we're capturing are, typically, behaviors and events, and those, typically tied to, using, let's say, a handheld device, for example. But, I mean, it's pretty straightforward, as far as what the requirements and what the job, expectations are.
Can you guys talk a little bit about from the senior management side? Is it a tough sell? And I know, Vic, that's kind of you, but Greg, you probably had some senior people and you had to sell it as an investment. Was that a challenge?
It was, and it was partially because I didn't roll it out right. We should have got the managers more involved, and should have given them a trial time with it to use it, and then spread the word to the employees about how dangerous distracted driving is, because we're in a hurry to get in our truck and go to a job site. The last thing that we're concerned about is driving. And I explained to our drivers that it's, we stress hard hats, gloves, eye protection nonstop, but we hardly ever talk about driving safety. And it's driving on the roadways is probably the most dangerous job that we do. And of course, when you're involved in an accident, they don't see the Nabholz sign on the door. They see a dollar sign. And if they can't contribute speed or reckless driving to something, the first thing they're going to say is, well, they were on a cell phone. They had to be, right? So, and I explained to them that, that's the most dangerous job that we do. And we need to be proactive and not wait for us to have an incident to get around the round table and say, well, we need something. We need cameras and a lifesaver app and everything because we've done this. You need to head it off before it gets there.
Vic, anything you want to add to that?
I mean, for us, it's again, like I mentioned, it's coming down from FedEx Ground corporate safety. We are a little bit lucky in the sense that FedEx corporate actually pays, for our safety technologies that we implement, everything from, dash cams to the lifesaver application that is running on our devices. Because, I mean, the reason being we operate under FedEx LGOT. So anything that, independent contractors can do to improve the overall safety, whether it be CSA scores, I think there's value all around.
Sure. Another question actually probably mostly for Ted, but also for Greg and Vic. From an integration standpoint, we talked about kind of a fleet safety tech stack, and you guys should talk about how cell phone blocking technology integrates with what you're doing with telematics and what you're doing with video monitoring.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So we have a lot of channel partnerships, as I mentioned or alluded to earlier. We work with some of the biggest telematics providers. We also have other channels like mobile device management. So MDM is the acronym that some of you folks might be familiar with. And across all the channels that we work with, we look for opportunities to integrate our solution in a way that makes it easier for the customer to manage this solution across many, many devices, right? So one example of that would be a leading telematics provider. We integrated with their ELD solution. And when I say integrate, I want to explain that just a little bit. So it's really just about taking the information that could be in another system and allowing that to be used by our system so that it's easier for the fleet operator to manage our system with less work, right? So that's really the goal of every integration. And so, like, for instance, in this telematics example, we took the ELD duty status, right? On duty, off duty. There's no better signal for when a driver's on duty or off duty than the fact that they've clicked the on button for their ELD solution, right? And clicked it off. So that's a perfect signal. And so we integrate with that signal. And whenever that driver's indicated that they're on duty through the ELD app, we automatically know that, and we are active and protecting, of course, only when you're driving, but we're active and protecting once that click of the ELD status occurs. And then, of course, then we go back to sleep when when they turn it off and they say they're not driving anymore. So it's a really nice example. Other examples are just, and I'll just briefly mention this so that people kind of get this idea of what integrations are from the Lifesaver perspective. But, for instance, in the Lifesaver system is an app plus a portal, right? So the portal really has all the sort of record keeping of how each driver is doing, whether it's a device represented, if a driver is associated or doesn't share that device, then the device equals the driver in this case, right? So what we try to do is we try to integrate with our partner solutions and grab all the driver/device information that's necessary to create driver profiles in our system, so that you have a very easy way and a very automatic way of creating all these driver profiles, so that who needs to be coached up, if they're continually attempting. And let me be clear, in our system, when you try to unlock your phone, we block it. But even that attempt is something that we don't want to happen. So we measure those attempts and report that back to you, so that by driver profile, who's attempting more and who's attempting less. So again, just integrations are things that we look to help our customers manage our system much more easily. That answer your question, sure?
That does. Thank you. I think we're actually over our time a little bit. If anybody,
I just wanted to look, if you don't mind, I just wanted to show that one slide up at the end here. And again, just not just making this a very generic thing, but there's certain factors that we think you should consider when you're choosing a cell phone blocking solution, if you get to that point where you are looking for one. This is obviously going to be available in the slides that go out to everyone who attended or registered. And if you have anyone who wants to get these slides, just have them register, even though the webinar is over. They will still get these slides. But and I won't walk through all these things today, but these are important considerations to consider as you're evaluating these types of solutions. And I'll let you close up here, sure.
I just want to thank everybody for their time today. And as I mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to send an email to me or to Ted. Happy to help out. We will send a copy of this out. It's also been recorded. So if you want to watch it, if you want to pass it along to senior management, we'll make it available. And again, thanks for your time, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.